Hello and welcome to this very important interview conducted by the Linc student newspaper. My name's Jared Johnson and I'm the newspaper's editor. Now, the reason we're here is that this week the University of Lincoln Student Union is holding a second referendum on its affiliation with the National Union of Students. The first was held back in May during the previous academic year, where Lincoln students voted to leave the NUS. The turnout was low, just 12.6% of students voted in that referendum, and the margin of victory was narrow, with just 77 votes between the two sides. Lincoln Students' Union say it's for this reason, and a number of students asking for it, that we're having another referendum. I must point out that the Lincoln's SU is remaining neutral throughout the process, and I also want to say that the Linc is Lincoln's only student newspaper, and it's independent of both the university and the SU. As an organisation, we're not forming an opinion either way on this referendum. We are simply here to scrutinise both sides of the argument, as well as the process itself. So joining us now is Richard Brooks. He's the NUS's Vice President for Union Development. Thank you so much for joining us, Richard. Can I start off by asking you, were the NUS in support of the University of Lincoln having a referendum back in May?
Oh, no, thanks very much for having me. When it comes to whether or not we support referendum or not, we absolutely always support students on their local campuses across the 550 student unions across the UK who are affiliated to NUS. We totally support them making decisions about things that are important to them locally. So when it came to the issue of whether or not a certain student union was having a referendum, we will never take issue with a student union wanting to hold a vote on it and giving their students a voice on that. For us, it's just about being able to give the opportunity to have the debate and then give it information in terms of why we think it's to the benefit of Lincoln students and students across the UK to be a part of a national movement.
Just to be clear, the NUS didn't oppose our students' union having a referendum back in May?
No, of course we didn't. And even if we did, we wouldn't be able to, quite simply. It's not for us to. So, I mean, and often people, I think, have a misconception actually about NUS in this regard. So students' unions run themselves. They are autonomous. NUS cannot tell student unions what to do. Student unions tell NUS what to do, and that takes many forms and guises. And one of them is that if a student union wants to hold a referendum and the students at that certain place want to hold a referendum on NUS membership, we would never try and stop that, and nor would we be able to even if we did want to.
Now, of course, we did have that referendum back in May, and by a slim majority, we voted to leave the NUS. Given that result, I take it the NUS are pretty pleased that the referendum's being rerun?
I mean, we are obviously incredibly happy that there are a number of Lincoln students who want to rejoin the national.
Do you know how many of that is?
No, I don't. So I know based on the statement that's on the website that there were, in terms of the Lincoln Student Union website, should say that there are a number of different student groups and enough students to trigger a referendum of their own volition, which is why the referendum was called in its way. So we're happy that happens. There are a number of student unions who have NUS referenda regularly. So, everyone from Exeter all the way through to York often hold annual NUS referenda. So this is in any way unnatural. And actually, we're quite happy to be given the opportunity to, to be given the opportunity to go to Lincoln students again and articulate why it's to, I think, their benefit and students' benefit everywhere that Lincoln's part of NUS.
Now, one of the reasons given for that initial referendum was for the second referendum, is that the current cohort, which includes obviously a new intake of first years, didn't get to have a say. So on that basis, would you support a referendum every year?
I think, like I said before, I think it's for student unions to decide absolutely whether or not they're a part of NUS and how they do that. I have no problem whatsoever with annual referenda. So if Lincoln SU and the students at Lincoln felt like that it was within their benefit to hold annual referenda, I would absolutely have no personal problem with that at all. I think it's up for Lincoln SU to decide. So if you want to do it on a regular basis, a lot of student unions do it once every 3 years or so, but that would be up for Lincoln students to decide.
So back when we had that original referendum, the then SU President Hayley Jane Wilkinson said that they no longer felt confident that the NUS represented the views of Lincoln students. Do you think that's changed since May?
Well, I mean, I would always want to ask the question why Hayley and why Lincoln SU may have felt that at that time, because I wouldn't always necessarily agree with that, to be
Well,
entirely honest with
well,
you.
she said that it felt as though the NUS were quite far removed from issues that affect students in Lincoln.
Well, I mean, and based on the fact, so as you probably know, I'm a former president of Hull University Students' Union, which is one of the largest HE students' unions near Lincoln, and I've been on campus.
They've voted to disaffiliate as well, haven't they?
They did indeed, and having spent quite a lot of time, basically, I think, on Lincoln campus, speaking to students, the issues that Lincoln students were talking about and the things that they really cared about were to do with housing, were to do with money, were to do with student opportunities, and sports teams, and societies. And absolutely, NUS is doing a number of different things to support student unions and to win campaigns for students on those issues. So I would say that actually I think we are doing a lot of the things that students would expect and hope their national union to be doing. And sometimes people don't have the opportunity to hear that. And that's why we're often quite glad when we have the opportunity in referenda season to go and articulate that.
If I could just interject, what examples are there of that, particularly with Lincoln? I mean, how much does the NUS sort of engage with and know about problems that are specifically linked to Lincoln?
I mean, when you talk about engage, right now I'm stood outside the Students' Union, and there's a session going on upstairs right now that's being led by an NUS officer that's all to do with how we make sure that sports teams and societies are as accessible as possible to as many different students as possible. I, as an NUS officer, has visited this campus with a number of people over the last couple of years, and actually, if you look at, like I said, the stuff that I think Lincoln students care about based on what they have told me and what's been said publicly by the Students' Union as your representatives, it's been around housing, and NUS have had a number of significant wins for students in this area, whether or not it's the fact that students don't pay council tax all the way to the tenancy deposit scheme. It's to do with tuition fees, and NUS have run a number of different campaigns on that. That's the cost of living.
Sorry to just interrupt again, but there's been a report out recently that Lincoln students now pay a premium on housing. So, for example, if they are in the same type of housing as someone who isn't a student, they will, on the whole, pay more than someone that isn't a student. I mean, how are the NUS sort of helping with that?
Well, I mean, I think that is a perfect example of why Lincoln being a part of a national union is in its benefit, because just to answer the first bit before I answer your second part of your question is, in terms of that premium on housing that Lincoln students have to pay more for similar types of housing than Lincoln permanent residents, actually that's something that's replicated across the board in the United Kingdom, and that's something that we have to tackle nationally. So I think it's worth saying that. We're obviously doing a number of different things in terms of working with different landlords and tenancy providers. We are lobbying the government. So when there's been housing bills in the recent past, we've obviously been talking about the impact that's had on rent for students. We've fought nationally against the Article 4 directions, which I know have been an issue in Lincoln because they were a couple of years ago at the same time as they were in Hull, which is about getting students out of the area around the university. So I think we've done a number of really significant things that have helps Lincoln students when it comes to housing. And I think that if those issues, again, can be fought nationally, and most of the time they will be, that's what NUS is here to do that nationally, whilst Lincoln SU does it locally.
Now, if I could go back to the original reason that sort of prompted this debate, and it was when the NUS elected your president, Malia Buatia, who had been accused of previously making anti-Semitic comments, and I must say that she strongly denies those claims. And the NUS has been recently, again, hugely criticised when it was claimed that delegates debated whether to commemorate the Holocaust or not. I mean, what would you say to sort of ease students at Lincoln's concerns about the NUS being an organisation out of touch on these sorts of matters?
Well, I think let me address the anti-Semitism point first, because I think it's the most important and something that people want to hear, and that is that everyone across the student movement and in NUS takes allegations of anti-Semitism incredibly seriously. That when Jewish students, and I said this really publicly last week on BBC Radio 4, when Jewish students consistently raise concerns, I think we need to listen to them and address them. I think in a number of different ways NUS is. And I think the best thing that we can do at this point is to listen to Jewish students' concerns and do things, everything to do with our Vice President of Society and Citizenship, Robbie's work on Jewish students within the student movement, all the way through to our institutional racism review, which includes anti-Semitism. I think we're taking it really seriously, and we're going to make sure that this is a problem which isn't just a problem of the student movement, but across wider society, is tackled, and that we support Jewish students. So,
but as a national organisation, hasn't your credibility on this matter been undermined? And what are you doing to regain that credibility?
So, yes, I think it has, and I have to be direct about that, which is why I think a number of us inside NUS, and I, like I said, include myself in this, are raising these concerns. And as I said, in terms of what we're doing, there's obviously the institutional racism review, there is obviously the work that Robbie is doing. But, I mean, ultimately, when it comes to whether or not, because you're obviously talking about the comments of one individual within NUS as opposed to the vast majority of it.
They are the president now.
Yeah, absolutely right. And what I would say to Lincoln students, and what I'd say to students across the UK, is that if you disagree with the political direction or the comments of the National Union of Students, that NUS doesn't act as leaders, students' unions do, and that is ultimately within the gift of students' unions to change. So I think that is important to say as well.
Okay. At the moment, it costs, according to our students' union, it costs £44,000 a year for our students' union to be a member. Why is it that high?
Well, last year it was £27,000, or actually much lower, and the reason why it's gone up is because Lincoln Students' Union, Lincoln Union, for two reasons. Lincoln University has increased its student numbers quite dramatically, and Lincoln Students' Union has increased the amount of money that it gets and makes as turnover. So that's how we kind of calculate that. In terms of why it's so high, it is a progressive affiliation fee, and what I mean by that, and I hope and imagine that you would agree, is that it makes sense that students' unions with the most money input the most into the national movement, while smaller students' unions with less resources, for instance, in colleges, would pay less, because that's kind of half the point of the national movement, is that larger student unions like Lincoln Students' Union as well as Hull, where I'm from, give into the student movement more than, say, Bradford College would, or Lincoln College or Hull College. And that because of that, we can support students across the United Kingdom, and not just where there are large, well-funded students' unions.
There was a debate about, just coming back to this particular referendum on Monday night. Are you concerned about the turnout and the lack of engagement within the student community?
I mean, I
mean, it wasn't well attended, was it? And most of the people were either journalists from the Linc or SU officers themselves.
Yeah, and as you know, I was in attendance at that debate because I thought it was important that me and other NUS officers were there. Like, in terms of turnout, like I said, Lincoln students will ultimately decide whether or not this is something that's important to them. This obviously was a referendum that happened, 4 or 5 months ago, so there may be an element of students having been, some students being asked the same question twice. I think that we probably will hit chorusy. I'm not too concerned in terms of turnout for debates, because sometimes they're not necessarily representative of student opinion of it as a whole. And ultimately, I think it's basically within the power and it's the responsibility of people within NUS and within Lincoln, whether or not arguing yes to NUS or to remain disaffiliated, to make sure that they get out the vote. I mean, I've been here for a short while already in Lincoln over the last 24 hours, and I've seen the Yes campaign team out talking to students and articulating why they think it's important. I've yet to see a No campaigner, and I couldn't tell you why, but I don't know if people are hoping.
Yet they still won back in May. Doesn't that kind of say something?
Well, I think it was very different in May, wasn't it? Because there was a
There's
far
still a low
larger debate on
turnout.
campus. Well, yeah, there was a low turnout, but there was a far larger presence on campus. There was a lot more debate. I think the campaign teams were far larger. Ultimately, like I said, it's up for the campaign teams either way to be able to go to students and articulate why they think it's important. So if it does not hit chorusy, I think that's another question, and one that Lincoln students and NUS need to reflect on. But
I mean, part of the reason for having another referendum was the fact that in the last referendum in May, the turnout was really low. So what you're saying is that the campaigns have been even less this time. So doesn't that mean there's a concern that the new result might be even less undemocratic than the first one?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I think what I am saying is that it's too early to preempt these things, and that we're currently on the Tuesday of a 4 or 5 day voting period, and that I think that if we get to Friday and we haven't hit chorusy, then I think it's another conversation. But I'm confident that we will, and the reason I'm confident we will is because the Yes campaign team and myself as an NUS officer and other officers will be going to students and articulating why it's important to be a member of the national movement and the benefits that you get from that, whether or not that's a national collective voice, support for your student union, or money that goes back into students' pockets, and I think we'll be able to win that argument, and I'm confident we will.
Does it reflect badly, though, on the NUS that there is a sort of lack of turnout and interest in this, that students don't particularly think it's a key service that they want to save?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, often I think this is about the relationship between NUS, the student union, and students. We rely on the local student union, whether or not in Lincoln or in other places, to communicate with students and to represent their students to us. And I think one of the things that we'll be reflecting on is making sure that as many students as possible know about the fact there's a referendum happening. It's obviously freshers season, and a lot of people are either just recovering from that or getting ready to go to their first ever, seminars or lectures of the year. So, like I said, I'm not particularly concerned about it because I think we are going to hit chorusy, and I think that's going to be the responsibility of the campaign teams, to be honest with you.
Do you think the NUS, the Students' Union at Lincoln have done a good enough job in promoting this referendum?
I mean, I'm obviously not a Lincoln student. I can see things on social media and I hear about when things are communicated. From what I've seen, the Students' Union have done a pretty good job of communicating the fact there's a referendum happening, in terms of the debate about, where voting is. And like I said, in terms of people knowing about it, I'm hopeful that they will. We obviously don't know that, but I think the Students' Union have done a good enough job to tell people about it. And it's, like as I've said before, the responsibility of the campaign teams to win the arguments, and I think we will.
Richard, I really appreciate you joining us, and I know you're a very busy man. But if I could ask you one last question, and that's what happens if Lincoln does vote to leave?
I mean, it'll be what I think will happen is that it will be to the detriment of both Lincoln Students' Union and to the national movement. I think Lincoln as a students' union benefits, and its students benefits massively from being a member of NUS, and whether or not that's the NUS discount card, being a part of the purchasing consortium which lowers drinks and food prices.
Can I just say, on the NUS card, you can get discounts in many places now without an NUS card, can't you? I mean, I'm not going to name the brand, but I signed up for a discount scheme the other day with a very popular clothing company for young people, and I didn't need an NUS card.
Yeah, and I think there are three key differences between other student discount providers and the NUS Extra Card. And I think the three are that there are still a significant number. Over 60 of our partners are exclusive on the NUS Extra Card, so you cannot get all of the same discounts that you can get with other providers. So I think that's one. I think two is that the thing that people forget is that the money that you pay for an NUS Extra Card, a significant proportion of it, actually about a third, goes directly back into your student union, and that's money that goes on sports teams and societies and student activities and advice. And the third thing is that by being a part of something that's larger than yourself, the NUS Extra Card, with over 900,000 active users, NUS uses that as a way to make the world a better place. We lobby companies around ethical and environmental practices, and we use it to constructively engage with multinational companies who otherwise wouldn't care about the sustainability concerns of students. So I do think there's a really significant difference between how NUS conducts its commercial services and where that money goes, which is usually directly into students' unions or students' pockets, as opposed to private companies who use it to line their own pockets. And that's absolutely fine, but I think there is a significant difference there. And I think that if Lincoln Students' Union left NUS, it's not just that, but the support the students' unions get and the national campaigning voice would be lost by Lincoln students. Having
said all that, though, they would be joining a few top universities that have already decided to leave. Obviously, we've mentioned your former university, Hull, but Loughborough and Newcastle have as well.
Sorry, I didn't know if you just said York, but York haven't left NUS there.
Oh, no, I said your previous university, Hull, and Loughborough and Newcastle have as well.
Yeah, of course. And, there will always be students' unions who will potentially flit in and out of membership. There's been some long-standing ones in England, a couple of them. And, they continue to exist. No one's saying they won't. The reality of that is that still 95% of student unions across the United Kingdom are affiliated to NUS, and that every time a student union leaves NUS, unfortunately, it is a thing that stops us doing the work we need to do because it hampers our ability to be a representative voice of students. And the only reason I, for instance, as a national officer, get into rooms with government ministers, with businesses, with different parts of civil society to represent and win things for students is because we get to stand with 550 student unions behind us. That's the power of being a part of a collective movement, and that's hampered every time a student union leaves. Saying that, when students do raise concerns around NUS democracy, around anti-Semitism, around not being relevant to students, we are listening to that. We have to. We will understand those concerns, and we will do what we're currently doing, which is change and adapt.
And if Lincoln did decide to leave, you'd be happy to have us back in the near future?
Always, absolutely always. I've been asked this question a number of different times. Whenever a student union leaves, this is a sad day. There is no bitterness there because students locally at that place have decided that. But saying that, if in a 6 months, a year, 2, 5 years, whenever that time might be, those students decide that they want to be part of the national movement, we will of course welcome them back with open arms because, as I said before, the power of being a part of a student movement is the fact that there's 7 million other students behind you.
Richard Brooks, NUS Vice President for Union Development, thank you very much for speaking to the Linc.
Thank you very much, Jared.
And just as a reminder, voting has already begun in this referendum. It started on Monday. Polls close at midday on Friday, with a result expected to be announced later that same day. I want to repeat that the Linc is Lincoln's only student newspaper, and it's independent of both the university and the SU. As an organisation, we're not forming an opinion either way on this issue. We are simply here to scrutinise both sides of the argument as well as the process itself. Lincoln's SU are staying neutral throughout this process. I'm Jared Johnson, and thank you very much for listening to this interview.